Jack's leg throbbed with every step, each pulse of pain a reminder of his vulnerability. He had been hobbling for hours, the fractured bones splintering his resolve with every jolt. The rural landscape around him was a picture of desolation, filled with abandoned houses and fields choked by weeds. A place, once teeming with life, now lay silent and still. A tomb for forgotten memories. He couldn't afford to stop. Not for a moment. He glanced back over his shoulder and saw it. A figure in the distance, stumbling through the overgrown fields. At first, he thought it might be another survivor. But as the figure drew closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The zombie moved with a grotesque, rhythmic shamble, each step a sick parody of life. Its clothes hung in tatters, and its skin, pallid and rotting, glistened in the fading sunlight. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Instinctively, he tried to increase his pace, but his broken leg betrayed him. He could only manage a desperate, limping shuffle, barely faster than the creature's relentless advance. I can outpace it, Jack told himself. But doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Each painful step felt slower, more labored, as if the weight of his fear was dragging him down. The zombie, unburdened by pain or fatigue, shambled ever closer. Jack's exhaustion deepened as the day wore on. Dehydration clawed at his throat, and his vision began to blur. He started hearing things. Faint whispers carried on the wind, indistinct but unsettling. Shadows flickered at the edge of his sight, just out of reach. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind, but the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Jack, you can't escape. He stumbled, nearly falling, but caught himself just in time. Panic surged through him. He needed to keep moving no matter what. Up ahead, he saw an old farmhouse, its windows broken and door hanging ajar. Jack hobbled towards the farmhouse, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He reached the porch and risked a quick glance back. The zombie was still trailing behind him, undeterred. Summoning what little strength he had left, he dragged himself through the open door and slammed it shut behind him. There was no time to rest, but he needed a moment to think. The farmhouse was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay and abandonment. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by Jack's entrance. He scanned the room, taking in the faded family portraits on the walls, the broken furniture, the shattered glass. It was a place frozen in time, untouched by the horrors outside. Jack limped through the house, trying to find something, anything that could help him. But there was no food, no water, only memories of a life long gone. The whispers followed him inside, growing louder, more accusatory. You brought this on yourself. You deserve this. Jack covered his ears, trying to shut out the voices, but they only grew more insistent. He squeezed his eyes shut, desperate for a moment of peace. The pain in his leg was unbearable, a constant reminder of his fragility. He couldn't afford to stay here long, but he had no choice. He needed to keep moving, to stay ahead of the zombie. How did I end up here? Jack wondered, the question echoing in his mind. His thoughts drifted back to the days before the outbreak, to the life he had lost. He saw the faces of loved ones, now gone, their smiles twisted into grimaces of pain and betrayal. He remembered arguments, regrets, and the crushing weight of guilt. The whispers seemed to read his thoughts, latching onto his darkest memories. You're alone because you pushed them away. You failed them. Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. He wanted to scream, to silence the voices, but he was too weak. Instead, he stumbled through the farmhouse, clutching his broken leg, and prayed for a way out. Outside, the zombie's moans grew louder, a reminder that his nightmare was far from over. As darkness fell, the farmhouse grew colder, more oppressive. Jack's visions intensified, the shadows in the corners of the room seeming to come alive. He saw figures moving in the darkness, heard footsteps where there should be none. The line between reality and illusion blurred, leaving him teetering on the edge of madness. He couldn't stop. He forced himself to move, one painful step at a time, through the house and out the back door. The zombie followed, its lifeless eyes locked onto him, a ghastly grin on its decayed face. Jack's hope dwindled with each passing moment. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. As the night dragged on, he made his way through the backyard and into the dense forest beyond. The trees closed in around him, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare him. The whispers followed, mingling with the zombie's relentless moans. "You can't escape. You can't escape." Jack covered his ears and kept moving, but the voices followed him into the darkness, a never-ending torment. And as the forest swallowed him whole, he realized the terrifying truth. The real horror wasn't the zombie behind him, but the one inside his own mind. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Jack hobbled through the dense forest, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. His leg was a throbbing, fiery pain that threatened to consume him, but he couldn't stop. Not with the zombie so close behind. Every time he glanced back, its pale, lifeless eyes were fixed on him, its ghastly grin unwavering. The forest was a maze of shadows, an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the zombie's relentless shuffling. Jack's mind raced, desperate for a plan, but the pain and exhaustion clouded his thoughts. He needed to find a place to hide, to rest for just a moment. But the whispers followed him, insistent and cruel. "You can't escape. You can't hide." Jack shook his head, trying to clear the voices. He stumbled over a root and nearly fell, catching himself on a tree trunk. His hands were trembling, and his vision blurred with tears. The shadows seemed to close in around him, their shapes twisting into grotesque figures. "Jack, you brought this on yourself." He squeezed his eyes shut and pushed forward, each step a battle against his failing body and the creeping dread that filled his mind. The forest seemed endless, each tree a sentinel watching his futile struggle. The zombie's moans echoed through the darkness, a constant reminder of his relentless pursuer. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Jack's movements became mechanical, driven by sheer willpower. He stumbled into a small clearing, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. In the center stood a dilapidated shed, its wooden walls covered in moss and vines. Jack hobbled towards the shed, every step a symphony of pain. He reached the door and pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the air was stale and musty, but it offered a brief respite from the relentless pursuit. He stepped inside and leaned against the wall, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. The whispers grew louder, filling the small space with their venomous accusations. "You deserve this. You failed everyone." Jack clutched his head, trying to drown out the voices. He looked around the shed, searching for anything that could help him. There was a rusty old toolbox in the corner, and he limped over to it, hoping for something, anything, to aid his escape. He found a few old nails and a hammer, useless against the undead, but he pocketed them anyway. A sudden knock on the door made him jump. His heart raced as he turned to face the entrance, half expecting the zombie to burst through. But the door remained closed. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Is there someone else out there? Another survivor? He limped to the window and peered out, but the forest was empty, save for the shambling figure of the zombie, still making its way towards him. The knocking continued, growing louder and more frantic. Jack backed away from the door, his mind spinning. The shadows inside the shed seemed to shift and twist, taking on menacing forms. "Let us in, Jack!" He shook his head, clutching the hammer tightly. The door rattled on its hinges, as if something was trying to force its way inside. Jack's panic grew. He couldn't stay here. He had to keep moving. He opened the back window and clambered out, biting back a scream as his broken leg scraped against the frame. Outside, the forest seemed even darker, more oppressive. The whispers followed him, mingling with the zombie's relentless moans. Jack hobbled away from the shed, his every step an agony. He felt eyes on him from every direction, the shadows closing in. "You can't escape." Jack stumbled through the trees, his vision swimming. He could hear the zombie behind him, its pace unchanging, unwavering. He was losing strength, his body nearing its limit. He tripped over a fallen branch and fell to the ground, pain shooting through his leg. For a moment, he lay there, gasping for breath, the cold earth pressing against his skin. The zombie's moans grew louder, closer. Jack forced himself to his feet, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. He pressed on, each step a monumental effort. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless labyrinth of darkness and despair. He reached a small stream, its water black and murky in the moonlight. Jack knelt by the edge, his throat burning with thirst. He cupped his hands and drank, the cold water a brief relief. But even as he drank, he heard the whispers, taunting him. "It's too late. You can't escape." Jack pushed himself up and waded through the stream, the cold water numbing his leg. On the other side, the forest loomed even darker, more foreboding. He pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the primal need to survive. The hours dragged on, an endless march through the darkness. He stumbled into another clearing, this one smaller and more enclosed. A large oak tree stood in the center, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Jack leaned against the tree, his strength nearly gone. He could feel its presence, hear its relentless shuffling. Jack's vision blurred, the edges of the world dissolving into darkness. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The pain, the exhaustion, the voices. It was all too much. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to gather what little strength he had left. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Give up, Jack!" But Jack wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He opened his eyes and pushed away from the tree, hobbling towards the other side of the clearing. The zombie was there, its lifeless eyes fixed on him, its decayed grin unwavering. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to move, one painful step at a time. As he crossed the clearing, the whispers reached a fever pitch, their voices blending into a cacophony of despair. But Jack pushed through, driven by the primal need to survive. He entered the forest once more, the darkness closing in around him. The night stretched on, an endless torment of pain and fear. Jack's movements became slower, more labored, but he never stopped. The zombie was always behind him, a relentless specter of death. And the whispers never ceased, their accusations and taunts a constant reminder of his guilt and failure. But Jack pressed on, driven by a glimmer of hope, a spark of defiance. He wouldn't let the darkness consume him. Not yet. And as he hobbled through the forest, he clung to that spark, determined to survive no matter the cost. Dawn's first light pierced the dense canopy of the forest, casting eerie shadows on the ground as Jack continued his desperate flight. Each step sent waves of agony through his broken leg, but he couldn't stop. The zombie's relentless shuffling echoed behind him, a constant reminder of the nightmare that pursued him. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his vision blurred by exhaustion and pain. The forest was a maze of twisted paths and treacherous terrain, each turn a potential dead end. Jack stumbled forward, his mind a fog of fear and determination. The whispers had become a chorus, their voices mingling with the zombie's moans. "You can't escape. You deserve this." Jack pushed through the underbrush, his movements mechanical, driven by sheer willpower. He reached a steep incline and began to climb, using his hands to pull himself up the rocky slope. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he pressed on, the zombie's presence like a shadow at his back. At the top of the incline, the forest opened up into a small, fog-covered clearing. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and fallen branches. In the center stood a dilapidated shed, its wooden walls covered in moss and vines. Jack limped towards it, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers grew louder, their tone more urgent. "End it, Jack. There's no escape." He ignored the voices and scanned the clearing, searching for any sign of escape. The fog was thick, obscuring the edges of the forest. He could feel the zombie's approach, its cold, dead eyes fixed on him. Jack's mind raced. He was running out of time, out of options. Desperation fueled his movements as he gathered rocks and branches, arranging them around the shed. He had to make a stand here, to find some way to slow the zombie down. He worked quickly, his hands shaking, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The whispers continued, relentless. You're alone. You failed them all. Jack's thoughts drifted to his family, to the faces of loved ones lost to the outbreak. He saw their smiles twisted into grimaces of pain and betrayal, heard their voices accusing him. The weight of guilt pressed down on him, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't let the past consume him now. The zombie emerged from the forest, its decayed form shrouded in fog. It moved with a slow, deliberate shamble, its lifeless eyes locked onto Jack. He felt a chill run down his spine as he faced the creature, the culmination of his fears and failures. "Come on," Jack muttered, gripping a large branch tightly. "Come on, you bastard." The zombie closed the distance, its movements unhurried, confident. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he raised the branch, ready to strike. The whispers reached a crescendo, their voices blending into a single, deafening roar. "You can't escape. You deserve this." Jack swung the branch with all his strength, striking the zombie's head. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his arms, but the creature barely flinched. It reached out with rotting hands, its fingers clawing at him. Jack swung again and again, each strike fueled by desperation and rage. The zombie's grip tightened around his arm, its strength surprising. Jack struggled, his mind a whirlwind of panic. He lashed out with his foot, kicking the creature in the chest. The zombie stumbled back, its balance momentarily lost. Jack seized the opportunity, and with all of his strength, he swung the branch into the zombie's head, knocking it to the floor. As it tried to get up, he kicked it in the chest. With his foot on its chest, he brought the branch down over and over again, reducing the head to little more than brain matter, blood, and skull fragments. The world around him seemed to warp and shift, the fog lifting to reveal a new scene. Jack blinked, disoriented. The zombie was gone, replaced by a woman lying on the ground. Jack's heart stopped. His wife. Her head now decimated by his blows. A hallucination, he realized. A side effect of his new medication. "No. This can't be happening," Jack whispered, dropping the branch. He fell to his knees beside her, his mind reeling. "Sarah. I'm so sorry."